I would now like to introduce the moderator for our first panel. Mr. Joshua Appel currently serves as the chairman for the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. He was appointed chairman of the PUC in April of 2011 by Governor Hickenlooper. Chairman Appel also serves as the chairman of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners Task Force on Environmental Regulation. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Appel was Assistant General Counsel at DCP Midstream, where he oversaw all environmental, public health, and safety matters for the company. He was also responsible for multiple areas of operations and helped develop the company's climate change strategy. Chairman Appel graduated from Williams James College and attended University of Michigan and McGill University. He earned his law degree from Franklin Pierce Law Center in New Hampshire. Please give a very warm welcome for Chairman Joshua Appel.
Well, thank you, Pam, and I'd like to thank Jim Carpenter for allowing me to moderate this very important panel. I will not be looking at you, neither will my panelists, because it's blindingly bright, but we'll do our best. As Pam mentioned, I used to work for DCP Midstream as their Environmental Health and Safety Council, and I spent lots of time in the field there. And what I saw working in, whether it's Eunice, New Mexico, Carthage, Texas, Moore, Oklahoma, was really the dedication and creativity of the field's hands and the company. I also chaired the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and approved many of the rules that facilitated or helped facilitate the boom in Colorado. But what was the best part about being the chair of that commission was I had a chance to witness the remarkable innovations in the E&P and midstream sectors. Today's panel will discuss the benefits of that innovation. The boom in U.S. oil and gas is affecting markets worldwide and creating a renaissance in manufacturing and facilitating a change in how we produce power and simultaneously reduce greenhouse gases in the United States. We have a uniquely talented panel to help us understand this renaissance. Our first speaker will be John Larson, who will give us the national perspective. John Larson leads a global practice providing customized analytic and economic research on a wide range of policy and industry issues. In this role, John develops quantifiable and actionable insight with expertise in a variety of industries, including energy, chemicals, healthcare, and automotive. Mr. Larson is currently leading IHS's ongoing research series measuring the economic contribution of unconventional oil and gas production to the broader United States economy. His latest work for this research series has focused on quantifying the economic impacts of the industrial and manufacturing opportunities associated with unconventional development. Mr. Larson holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics and History and a Master's of Public Policy from the Thomas Jefferson Program in Public Policy. Both are from the College of William and Mary. Rich Wobbekind will be providing the Colorado perspective. He is Executive Director of the Business Research Division and Senior Associate Dean for Academic Programs at the University of Colorado Boulder. He joined the faculty at the Leeds School of Business in 1985 and has served as Associate Dean since 2000. As Executive Director of Business Research Division, his responsibilities include developing an annual consensus forecast on the Colorado economy and performing various economic impacts of the Colorado economy. He also produces the quarterly Leeds Business Confidence Index for Colorado. To provide us with the local government experience, we are fortunate to have Commissioner Barbara Kirkmeyer. Barbara is a fourth-generation Coloradan and has spent 20 years working for her community and for Weld County. She was first elected as County Commissioner for District 3 in 1993 and served 8 years from 1993 to 2001 in that role before leaving to manage a statewide level department. She returned to Colorado government or county government in 2008 when she was elected again as Commissioner for District 3. She is currently serving her second term. And wrapping it up from the industrial perspective is Ted Brown. He's the Senior Vice President and Senior Advisor to President and CEO of Noble Energy. Ted Brown is responsible for the northern region of Noble Energy's United States Division. Elected Senior Vice President in April 2008, he previously served as Vice President of the same region since August 2006. He joined the company as Vice President of the United States Division in May of 2005 when Noble Energy acquired Patina Oil and Gas, a company I know well. Since joining Noble in 2005, Mr. Brown has dramatically grown the region threefold. At Patina, he served as Senior Vice President, and previously he spent more than 10 years serving as Director of the Piceance Basin, as well as Asset and Engineering Manager for Williams and Barrett Resources. Mr. Brown holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Wyoming. So our format today is each panelist will make a presentation providing a national, Colorado, local government, and industry perspective. We'll then have a discussion amongst ourselves, and we're going to try to do our best to leave time for question and answers. So I will turn it over to our first speaker, John.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me. And I will try my best, Joshua, to not filibuster, although I am from DC, so I'm used to that type of tactic. So just to establish my local credibility, I want everyone to know here that though I'm from Washington, D.C., I grew up at the foot of NCAR. My family is from this area, and my father is a graduate of UC Boulder, so go Buffs. So with that, let me just talk a little bit about, and I think that was an excellent introduction. I've had the privilege of working with IHS on what I think is one of the most profound energy transformations that has occurred in this century. For this country. Over the last about 4 years, I've been looking at what this has meant from both an energy context and an economics context, and it is truly a revolutionary event that we are living in, and very exciting times. As I like to speak to my colleagues and go around and talk about this both domestically and also internationally, this is the one thing that I get to go around and talk about as an economist that I can do it with a smile. There's not a lot right now to smile about, both domestically and globally. But when you talk about this subject, it is very, very illuminating. So we've had this study going on in many different ways over the last 4 years. And the most recent study we've been looking at is something we call America's New Energy Future. And it's a study that was launched first in November of 2012. And what we did was we looked at the national implications of this unconventional revolution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both the oil and the gas. And for points of context, I think it's easy to think of it as about a 50-50 split for now. That shift will transform over the future and the forecast. And it's probably going to move towards the 60-40 split, 60% gas, 40% oil. But it gives you an idea how big this is in its total context. So right now, if you look at the report we released in November, that looked at the E&P, the upstream. I think Alan did a great job earlier talking about this industry, what it's like, how it's moving, how it extracts these resources, the drilling, the completions, and all the intricacies that go into that. That is all fueled by massive capital expenditure, and that capital expenditure creates jobs. And so what we found basically was in 2012, about 1.7 million jobs in this country attributed to the onshore unconventional activity of both oil and gas. By 2020, that will go to 3 million jobs. So that's nearly doubling, and these next 8 years are extremely important and very formative in terms of where those jobs will develop and how they will unfold. And I think they're also important when you think of it in the context of our current economic condition. The slow recovery that we have been going through and expect to continue to go through, this is truly a growth engine. The other thing is that it's generating significant revenues. I think you heard Governor Hickenlooper talk about some of the revenues for the state. At the national level, you're talking about roughly $62 billion in federal and state taxes across the country. The federal share is roughly about half, so about $31 billion. And when we're talking about trillions, it doesn't seem like a lot. But if you think about the size of some of these agencies, that could fully fund NASA and the Department of Interior for one fiscal year. So that is a significant contribution to operating the government. When you think about this upstream, it's also important to think about what it means to the state. And we're going to hear a little bit more about what it means to Colorado as we step into some of the other panelists. But I think it's interesting to think about the fact that this is a broad supply chain. This is one of the things that we uncovered that really was shocking about how broad the supply chain is. As you heard, this was developed here. This technology was developed here. It's been really honed here. And a lot of the resources, the know-how, the industry reside in this country. And so what that means is, unlike many other industries, what you have is a dollar spent here in the U.S. predominantly stays here. Most of those dollars flow through this economy as opposed to seeking input from overseas. And so you have a profound effect across the states, both as contributors because they actually have geographic plays within their boundaries, but also because they supply those states that have geographic plays. So I think one of the most interesting things in our state report that came out in December was that you don't have to have a geographic play to have a stake in this unconventional revolution. In fact, 1 in 4 jobs are found in states that don't have a geographic play and are not participating actively. The best example I can give you is New York. New York obviously has a moratorium going on right now, but in 2012, they supported 44,000 jobs in that state by virtue of enabling unconventional activity in other states. So you think about what's unfolding in Pennsylvania, Ohio, you think about the expertise in New York from the finance, the real estate, the insurance, all those capabilities that are brought from the service sector to enable this unconventional revolution to take place require these sorts of skills and activities. And so these other states that don't actually have geographic activity are still benefiting. So that was extremely interesting, the 1 in 4 number. The third study we released in September of 2013 here, and that study transitioned from looking at the upstream to really starting to drive into and understand what this means in a much broader context for this country. So we've heard a lot of talk about the manufacturing renaissance, and we really wanted to try and quantify what this meant in a full value chain. And I think the easiest way to think of the study is to think about an analysis that looks at essentially from wellhead to consumer. What does this mean as you sort of try to take this product from extraction to delivery at the end of the day? And it's a pretty profound story. I think the most interesting thing was, from a consumer standpoint, I'll emphasize 3 points here. The first one is the pocketbook issue. And I think Marty Durbin mentioned this earlier. In 2012, our estimates from our modeling identified roughly $1,200 in increased disposable income for the average household in this country. $1,200. That is a significant increase in disposable income for the families. With 121 million households, it's roughly $163 billion in additional money in the economy that's being spent in other areas as opposed to those energy costs. Most of that is because of lower natural gas prices you're having, or electricity prices. That's predominantly where it is. It's either as a direct consumer, so you're either heating or cooking by natural gas, or your electricity prices have been held in check or relatively flat because of the advent of natural gas. I think one of the things that we sometimes fail to recognize is that in 2008, there had been a lot of completions of import facilities. This country was going to step into and import natural gas at a significant level. Stepping into that global market, you think about where that global market is today. You look at Europe, you're talking about 10 to 12. You look at Asia, you're talking about 15 to 17, depending upon the market and the spot price. And so this country is enjoying a significant spread and enjoying significant lower natural gas prices today because we are not importing from this global market. And so that's really what's driving a lot of our manufacturing renaissance. So you have this increase in disposable income because today consumers are enjoying these lower natural gas prices relative to the price that we would have had to face if we'd stepped into those global markets. The other thing is that the employment also goes up. So when we talked about that 1.7 million growing to 3 million in the national study looking at the E&P side, there's a midstream and downstream component to this that's very critical. It's the component that allows this natural gas to get from the wellhead to those beautiful vehicles you see at the back of the room. How are we going to do that? You have to build out a massive amount of midstream and downstream. I think this is one of the greatest challenges this country has to face today, but also our greatest opportunity, because in doing so, we're making an investment in the future, and we're doing so at a time when investment is very, very powerful, because there's low interest rates, there's a high unemployment rate, and you can see great returns by making these investments today over the next 8 years. And so you'll see this build out, and that's going to contribute roughly about 400,000 jobs in addition to that 1.7. So you think about in 2020, we're talking about roughly 3.4 million jobs that will be supported by both the upstream, that 2 million roughly, and then the midstream and downstream. So it's a significant contribution to the economy in terms of jobs, particularly when you look at unemployment rate and labor participation rates, which I think have shown some real weakness. The last thing that we looked at was really focused on the manufacturing renaissance. And this is probably one of the most interesting stories. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about the manufacturing renaissance and what does it mean. And this is the opportunity that this country is unlocking because of its competitive advantage relative to global markets. And as I mentioned, those competitive advantages are taking place in two ways. The first is that natural gas price spread between global markets. So we talked about the European price, 10 to 12, Asian, somewhere between 15, 17, depending upon the spot market, versus the US, where our outlook has us between 4 and 5 between now and 2030 or so abouts. And that spread is critical because that means that we have a lower natural gas price so that the energy and the consumption of natural gas in this country will spur growth. But the other interesting thing is the spread between natural gas and oil. This spread is an important component to why you're seeing some of the manufacturing renaissance in this country. One of the key ingredients to sort of the chemical industries, which is one of the most energy-intensive industries that you've got and is enjoying a significant renaissance in this country, is whether you're burning or developing your chemicals off of naphtha or ethane or other derivatives from natural gas liquids. And so that spread and how that price spread is coming about is because oil prices have risen, natural gas prices in the States have fallen. You've got a regional market for natural gas as opposed to a global market for oil. And you look at our competitors for some of these things in Europe, for example, and they're still stuck to oil-linked pricing. And they're facing significantly higher input costs for a lot of their manufacturing and industry around the chemicals than the US. And you've seen massive investment. BASF since 2008 has invested $1 billion+ in this country. We've talked about the $100 billion in investments that will take place over the next 10 years in this country to enable the chemical industry and other energy-intensive industries to unlock this revolution. So there's a significant investment gap taking place as countries look to the US that's lower prices, both foreign direct investment and domestic investment. So as we measured those, I think it's important though, so it's a great opportunity, tremendous opportunity. Energy-intensive industries in particular are going to benefit, but I do want to signal a point of caution here. There's a lot of factors that drive manufacturing renaissance. So when you think about it, there's things like your supply chain costs, your taxes, your IP laws and regulations, your wage gap, the productivity of your workers. All these factors lead to what you will call competitive advantage vis-a-vis other countries. The United States, I think, in many ways has been benefiting on some of these different measures. And so there's certain factors that are driving this manufacturing renaissance that are beyond the energy component. And so when I think about energy and when you think about the context of a manufacturing renaissance for this country and what this means for this country, I think it's important to think of energy as a necessary but not sufficient contributor to a manufacturing renaissance. So you're going to have energy. If in the absence of energy, what you see today in some of the hope of a manufacturing renaissance could not take place. But energy alone wouldn't allow it to take place. There has to be some other factors going on. And you've seen it happening. The wage gap between China and the US has been converging when you look at it on a productivity-based measure. So there are some significant things going on around the world that are enabling the US to look at some very significant upside opportunities from the manufacturing perspective. And what that means is that we look at, really, I think the best is yet to come. This is an industry that is unlocking, I think, significant opportunities. You're going to see industrial production go up by about 3.2% by 2015 and about 4.2% by 2020. And it's going to be predominantly in many of these energy-intensive industries as the midstream and downstream start to connect and bring this resource to bear so that we can enjoy these lower costs. And from there, I think the big question that you still have to ask is, as you start to look at all the supply chains, you look at something like an automobile. The role that chemicals and energy play in the production of an automobile, from the plastics that go into the interior to the highly energy-intensive aluminum chassis that most of the automobiles are using, there's a tremendous opportunity to build cars cheaper in this country. I think a great example is BMW, who is now manufacturing their carbon fiber unibody in the States as opposed to in Germany. And I'll leave you with this as I close. The opportunity that we have, I think, is truly unique. I travel a lot talking about this, as I said, both domestically and internationally. And the lack of appreciation and at the same time fear internationally is palpable. It's remarkable the discussions that I'm having at the CEO level internationally. And how countries are really trying to understand and come to grips. And it's been interesting to see this country, as I followed this from about 2007 on, this country, I think, has come to grips. And as Marty Durbin and Governor Hickenlooper said, I think we've moved beyond, is this real, to how do we use this? How do we match our abundant supply with abundant demand? I think that the international community is a little behind. They're still coming to grips with, is this real? And it's a fascinating thing to watch, and it's a fascinating opportunity for this country. And it does represent, I think, one of the greatest revolutions that we've seen, and a true economic bright spot in an otherwise very, very unfortunate and slow recovery that we've been experiencing. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Rich, who will talk a little bit about what it means now from a macro level to a state level.
So I didn't know this was going to be an issue before I got here, but you should be very happy that I prepared slides so you don't have to stare at the reflection the entire presentation. That's a joke. Okay. I have to tell you the jokes. There were two pieces in my introduction I would like to highlight. One is that we do a lot of quarterly information releases that I'm happy to take your card and put you on our mailing list for our economic releases. We do not rent or sell the list to anyone else. They're exclusively held by us at Leeds. And the other piece is that one of the things we do, in addition to doing a lot of forecasting, revenue forecasting and economic forecasting in general, is we spend time doing individual impact studies of industries. And so what you're about to hear is largely based off of a study we did and released earlier this year that uses data through 2012. And it's oil and gas together. I know this is the natural gas group, but it's difficult to tease those things out. And what John was just telling you about the supply chain very much comes into play on this, but really this report's understated compared to the supply chain he was describing. We really look at the actual production and supply chain related to production and distribution. We didn't, for example, factor in how much individual personal incomes rise when we did this study due to lower gas prices, lower energy prices, and so on. But I share his enthusiasm. I think this is one of the reasons, there's a small number of reasons why I'm extremely bullish on the U.S. economy, and energy is one of them. I really think it paints a bright future for the U.S. So with that, these numbers look small, but this is just focusing on Colorado. So when you can talk about it, contribution to state output, GDP, what we call gross domestic product at the state level, this industry produces about 3.7% of GDP output, 2.7% of wages, and 1.3% of employment. So when you look at it from just the pure employment number, you say it's a pretty small number. But you can sort of see on this slide what you'll see on the next slide. The wage slice is twice the size of the employment slice. And so when you look at the relative ranking of wages, there's only one industry category that we use in terms of, they use at the federal level when they talk about the various categories of employment. The mining sector is in Colorado, the second largest sector, only behind a category called management of companies and enterprises, which is basically corporate headquarters. So you would expect that to have extremely high annual income, and they do. And then every other sector in the state has a lower average wage than the minerals and mining sector does. What has been more encouraging, even though, as I've suggested, it's a small amount of employment, that small amount has been much more well, I guess I would say relatively stable, but also growing over the last 13 years in Colorado. So this is the all industries employment growth for Colorado, and then that's the mining growth up at the top. And of course, as you know, it certainly went through the recessionary sort of downturn in terms of, the commodity prices falling and so on. But still, when you look at the overall picture and the overall recovery, it's been quite impressive. And in fact, this next slide highlights that, that if you look at the long road to economic recovery in terms of employment, the state as a whole just passed its previous employment peak in February, and you can see mining recovered and got past its previous employment peak much more rapidly than the state overall. So it's been really a significant sort of buoy, as I think John was suggesting, in sort of weaker economic times. I would highlight, though, that Colorado is 5th in job growth in the country right now, and we think maybe move up to 4th in 2014. This is part of the reason why. I'm it's not the only reason why, but it's certainly part of the reason why. But if you looked at the states in front of us, of course, one of them would be North Dakota, which is growing tremendously off of this industry, as you all know. Tell you things you know. So I will say there are, and other states as well, like Oklahoma's of the world. So you will see sort of energy important states in that top 5 ranking as we look at the numbers. So what's gone on in terms of Colorado energy production by source? Well, you can see over time coal has gone down with the Clean Air Act and other things. Natural gas, which is what we're obviously focused on here today, has seen dramatic growth. And then up the top you can see crude oil. It makes a pretty skinny piece, but that's actually seen pretty significant growth. And then renewable energy, that little sort of chunk at the top. And you can see sort of this growth in energy has occurred, a little bit of dip in the recession, but that growth in energy has occurred pretty significantly over time. And so when you look at Colorado for many years, and people who are in energy such as yourselves and probably have a wider reach will maybe disagree with my next statement, but I'm going to make it anyway. We used to talk about Colorado being sort of a second-tier energy state, and with the growth that we've seen, particularly in natural gas and in crude oil, these numbers, latest numbers just came out. We just updated this slide yesterday. You can see that 11th highest coal producer, natural gas, crude oil, and so on. Renewables, and 7th largest energy producing state in the country at this point. So I don't know if that makes you first tier. Maybe, energy snobs might say you got to be in the top 5 or something. But certainly the role of energy in Colorado is very, very significant, and that's the point of the slide. So while we've talked about, some industries or some sectors doing better than others, the left-hand graphic sort of shows that. Shows the rise in output by looking at coal, natural gas, and crude oil. And you can see natural gas has increased, crude oil has increased, and coal has decreased. But then pitting that against the actual price of the product, natural gas, because of how much the price has come down, is in the lowest position, and coal has actually done relatively well, even with lower production. So it's kind of an interesting paradox, especially for coal. There's been a lot of concern about coal, and we do have parts of this state that are very, very coal dependent in terms of their industry base and not very diverse economy. So it really has raised some questions or issues about the energy future. But focus of the slide, natural gas for your purposes. So then we did a study that's tried to highlight for Colorado, and this is again oil and gas. It's not coal, it's just oil and gas. And we used a static sort of model and looked at the direct and indirect impacts of the industry. And so you can see we go all the way down to gasoline stations, which you might say, they certainly are in the gas industry, but some people may sort of squabble about that. But this is where we came up with the jobs and the employees in terms of the compensation that are involved. And then with the model, we were able to extrapolate that out for what we call indirect supply chain effects and induced effects. And you get much larger supply chain effects with the drilling and the extraction and refining and all of those top pieces. And so as you look along the line, you then wind up with employment down at 111,000 for the state. So you get the employment number, compensation number, and so on, and sort of major pieces. And there's a summary slide at the very end that hits some of those points in words. So I'll put that up, but we'll see that at the very end. But one very important piece, and I'm sure we'll hear this from the next speaker, is that these are employment and compensation pieces and output pieces for the state, but a very, very significant portion for many of the places, it's the taxes that are generated. And so when you look at the state oil and gas revenues, you can see the big pieces of the pie there coming from, for example, property taxes. And again, these accrue, in the case of property taxes, to the physical location of the production. So you might go, I'll pick another county that's not represented up here. You might go out to Garfield County, and they have a very, very heavy dependence on property taxes that are being driven from this industry or dependent on this industry. So this is the amount of disbursements that occur, and this is in thousands, so that's 150 million roughly. This is disbursements that come from the federal government off of extraction off of federal lands to the state. So that's one sort of major piece. This is the severance tax revenue, which is up in the $160 million range. We haven't gotten back. Of course, this is based on price, as you probably know, significantly. And then when you look at the property tax revenues for the state, property taxes are running up in the, close to 7 billion range, and about 10% of that is coming off of oil and gas properties, or oil and gas property taxes. So when you take that, you've got another roughly 700 million. And so when you add these things up, plus add up local taxes and the other things that were in my original pie, our latest estimate is there's about $1.5 billion of revenues being generated just in tax collections off of the industry through the various pieces in the process. Certainly, the numbers that you heard from John dwarf those kinds of numbers, but it's significant numbers for the state. So this slide does a little bit better job, and you can see it, it's in bigger print, but almost 30 billion added to the Colorado economy in 2012, production of 9.3 billion, natural gas 51% of that, oil, and then carbon dioxide. Approved drilling permits down 19%, which has been a little bit of a concern, I think, in terms of maintaining the momentum. Employment at 111,000, and then 3.8 billion paid to workers across the state, which is 2.8% of total earnings. So this study is actually posted. I can tell you where it's posted in more detail if you'd like to look at this or cite it or whatever. And I think there's every reason to believe we'll be doing another one with a more dynamic model in 2014, coming up here in the not too distant future. We'll be running a dynamic model on the industry. But in any case, this is sort of the numbers, and hopefully you find them of some interest. So thank you very much.
All right, well, I too am a graduate of the University of Colorado, so go Buffs. They didn't win last Saturday night, unfortunately. But, and this light is really bright, so I really can't see any of your faces. So you heard our last speaker say that he updated his slides yesterday. Well, I updated mine this morning at about 5:38. So if there's a mistake in my slides, we're just going to talk our way through it. I've been a little busy recently with a flood of epic proportions and, working on creating a new state. So with that, Weld County. I'm going to give you the local perspective and talk about how the energy industry in Weld County impacts our economy, has impacted our environment or our land use, and it impacts our community. In Weld County, you've seen some slides, over 20,000 active wells. I don't know if you looked at it, but I did. If you total up the next 4 counties, we have as many active wells in our county as Garfield, La Plata, Yuma, and Las Animas combined, which is a lot. It's close to 50% of the active oil and gas wells are within Weld County. What does that mean to us? It means that we bring in a lot of tax revenue, property tax revenues specifically. In fact, in 2013, we brought in close to $240 million to all of the taxing entities in property tax revenues in Weld County. That's about $60 million, a little more than $60 million in property tax revenues to Weld County. And there we go. Here it shows you the top taxpayers in Weld County. I used to have a slide that said 9 out of the top 10 were oil and gas industry folks or energy industry. Now it's 20 out of 25 are from the energy industry, taxpayers in Weld County. And what that does for us in Weld County is brings in a lot of revenue. We're a very fiscally conservative county. By the end of this year, we will have, even after the flood and paying for all the roads and the damages that we had occurred during the flood, we will have close to $90 million in our contingency fund balance unrestricted. We have no long-term debt. We have no short-term debt. And we give a Tabor refund to all of the property owners in our county to the tune of about $5.25 million. So it's a pretty good deal if you're living in Weld County. The economic impact is very good. And to put it in perspective for you with regard to all of the drilling that's occurring within my county, last year in Weld County, there was 1,822 well permits through the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. For my neighbors to the west, who I'm a little confused why they've got some of the things on their ballot that they have on their ballot, they had 22 well permits last year in Boulder County and 11 in Larimer County. So the impacts from the industry are real. Our folks will tell you, people who live in the county, and it's been around for a very long time in Weld County. I was at a Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission rulemaking, and there was actually a person who got up who lived in Weld County, said she didn't know that there was oil and gas there. And I'm thinking, she must not drive around very much in Weld County because you can't miss it in Weld County. But there are impacts. Some of them are real and some of them are perceived, so we deal with both of them. There are impacts with regard to the land use when it comes to noise, the dust from the roadways, lighting on the rigs, lighting at the sites, the air emissions, traffic, and perceived water contamination. As you saw in an earlier slide from one of the earlier presentations, there's no evidence, there isn't any case of where hydraulic fracturing has contaminated groundwater. In fact, I'm not sure of any case where it's actually contaminated groundwater. There are probably some cases where it's touched surface water. We hear a lot about that. With regard to these impacts, however, the Board of County Commissioners, we work to mitigate those. And 4 years ago, we created what we call our Energy Industry Work Group. We meet on a monthly basis. And this isn't guys like Ted Brown over here, who can tell you all the stuff that's going on down in the Denver area and within his company. It's his guys who are out in the fields. It's his guys that work with our public works folks and with our environmental health folks and our planning director to really work to mitigate these impacts. So they work to mitigate the noise. We work to mitigate the traffic, the access points, the dust. As far as the air emissions goes, in 2007, Weld County became part of a non-attainment area with regard to the 8-hour ozone. In 2009, because of what the energy industry did to go out and what I call catalytic converters on all of their drill sites, we are now well below the levels that EPA determines to be healthy. So our air is actually cleaner now than it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Regarding the water contamination, because we hear a lot about this, even though we know it's not true, you also heard earlier in a presentation about the wells that light on fire and the contamination. That actually was in Weld County and Hudson area, which is in my commissioner district. So I learned a lot about this, and as it was stated earlier, it was naturally reoccurring. But because of that incident, and because it just scares people because they just don't know, Weld County put in place a program to test all of the wells within Weld County. So if someone has a water well in Weld County and they want it tested, they can come to our Environmental Health Division and have it tested for free. You might also notice on my slide here that I have a picture of a dairy farm, a feedlot, and a subdivision. Because I will tell you, during my land use hearings, our land use hearings at the Board of County Commissioners, we get the same complaints and have the same impacts that the public wants us to deal with on other things within our county as well. The industry in our county has been a very good partner with us. They do impact our community. They invest in our community. They partner with us. And they actually are members of our community. They're one of our neighbors. About 4 years ago, I'm going to tell you about one of the projects that we work on with the industry. We created what is called the Weld County Natural Gas Coalition. I love this project. I drive a Honda Civic CNG vehicle, totally dedicated to it. I promised 4 years ago that my next vehicle that I bought when I was with this coalition would be CNG. Lo and behold, the engine went out on my car 2 years ago, and I bought a CNG vehicle. So I kept my promise. But what we did with this coalition, with the partnership of the industry, so folks like Noble and Anadarko and Encana, who made the match on congestion mitigation air quality funds, which are federal transportation dollars, they made the match so that we could put in place 4 natural gas pumping stations throughout Weld County. They also committed to converting their fleets to natural gas. Weld County committed to converting our fleet to natural gas and working on our 31 municipalities and our 22 fire districts to get them to start converting their fleets to natural gas. And also we work on our 12 school districts. In all total, in the last 3 years, within those governments, we have converted over 75 vehicles to natural gas. And you can see there at the bottom picture, that's part of the Weld County fleet. We've actually converted our large trucks, our haul trucks in the Public Works Department, to LNG vehicles. It's very beneficial for us with regard to the air, but it's really beneficial to us on the bottom line. We've been able to save millions of dollars by getting the grant funds to purchase our vehicles, but we're also saving thousands of dollars, in fact 29% savings in fuel savings on our large LNG vehicles. So we're realizing not only savings in air emissions, but also savings at the pump, so to speak. And you can see there, I noticed we had a slide earlier today in one of the presentations that in New York, it's a $1.99 GGE, gasoline gallon equivalent. Well, at the North Station, at Road 18 and Highway 85, it's only $1.95. So get your vehicle, come on up and fill up in Weld County. One of the other areas, and I didn't want to pass this up, that the energy industry has been a great partner to us, has been the, make sure I'm going right here, was the flood. I'm sure all of you have heard about the epic flood that we had in northern Colorado, in Boulder County, Larimer County, Weld County, and then throughout the Eastern Plains, pretty much wherever the Platte went. What most people don't realize is, yes, Weld County is a fairly dry county. We have about 12 inches of rain annually, so we're considered semi-arid. In a 5-day period, we had twice our annual rainfall in Weld County. We have 5 rivers in Weld County that all were flooding between September 11th and September 20th, because the rivers didn't really start receding until about September 20th. And you can see here by the pictures, we had a lot of road damage. At one point, we had 654 miles of road that was damaged in Weld County. We had over 80 irrigation structures that were wiped out, and we had over 100 bridges that were impacted by the flood. So while some of our friends in the environmental community were out flying around taking aerials and doing a fundraiser and trying to create a rumor and saying there was a disaster within the disaster, the oil and gas companies actually stepped up to the plate and showed what a good neighbor they are, and showed how they really do believe in our community, and they really do invest in our community, and they are vested in the people who live in Weld County. I'm just going to list off some of the things that they did for us. So on Friday morning, I contacted Dan Kelly of Noble, and I contacted John Ford and Travis DePorter of Anadarko, because I have these 3 people on my speed dial list. And I told them at about 10 o'clock in the morning that we had a shelter going up in Milliken. Milliken was basically cut off from everywhere at this point, same as Jamestown and Lyons and Estes Park. That we had a shelter with about 200 people in it, and that we were going to need some assistance with getting supplies. It took literally, because I checked my emails, it literally took 15 minutes for Noble to respond back to me and say, we've got Milliken, we will take care of them, they're our neighbor, they're down the road from us, we'll get whatever we need, and we'll get it there, and we'll have it there tonight, just tell us how we get there. That's pretty darn impressive. But it didn't stop there, because we had water lines that cut off to the Tri-Town area, which is Frederick, Firestone, and Tocono, which is a population of over 30,000 people. Their water lines were out. We didn't have water for that many people in Weld County for several days. They actually had a very small line that went through, so there was some water that was able to go through, but for all practical purposes, there wasn't any water in those communities. Anadarko and Canna and Halliburton provided water to those communities for 5 days, anything that they needed. So it didn't stop there, because we had a lot of flooding going on in the county. So I just kept sending emails to them, because they kept saying, what else do you need? What else do you need? And I thought, well, now I need barriers, and I need more supplies. I could use some cots. We could just flat out use some help. There's a Travis that works at Noble, and there's a Travis that works at Anadarko. They both sent me an email and said, we've got as many barriers as you need, because honestly, we ran out of barriers because we closed every north-south road, every major road that goes north and south in Weld County, between, it was 15 miles east of Greeley and 15 miles west of Greeley. All of those roads were closed, including I-25 and Highway 85 at some point during the flood. So those two Travises said, we'll take it wherever you need it, tell us what you need. I connected them up to my Public Works. They're out delivering barriers for us. And it doesn't stop there. On Saturday afternoon, after spending 3 hours at a shelter in Greeley, mostly filled with Evans folks who had nothing left because they had 20 minutes to get out of their trailers. Literally, when they were walking out of their trailer, they were in ankle-deep water. By the time they got to the end of the street, they were waist-high water. So they barely were able to get out of there. I came back to the EOC, where I had been for 3 days, and I literally sent an email to a very good friend of mine. His name is Chris Castillion, and he works with Anadarko. And I had this whole email worked out in my brain. It came out like this, though, in the email. What do you think about helping me with the people who are in the shelter? That's all I said. So I sent the email, and literally in 5 minutes, he responded back like, with what? With shelter, with food, what do you need? We'll help you with whatever you want. So then I quickly responded and sent an email and said, I'm thinking I need $50 gift cards for all of these folks because they literally have nothing. These kids are gonna have to go to school on Monday or Tuesday. They don't have shoes. They only have one outfit that they are wearing. I just need a $50 gift card for each of them from Walmart or Target so they can go buy their prescriptions, so they can go buy a toy, so they can go buy school supplies, so they can buy a pair of jeans, some tennis shoes, and a t-shirt, and a change of underwear. It took 5 minutes for Anadarko to respond, told me they were getting me 300 gift cards, $50 each, and they would deliver them to the EOC the next morning. I thought, wow, what a great idea. So I sent an email out to that energy industry work group that we'd been working with for 4 years and asked them if they would do the same thing, if they could assist with that. Within 40 minutes, we had raised $75,000 in gift cards to give to the folks who were in the shelters who literally had nothing. So I think that's pretty impressive of our oil and gas industry. So honestly, we didn't stop there with the ask, though. On about Tuesday following the flood, well, I'll have to get back to this slide, but following Tuesday, following the flood, we started asking our oil and gas folks if they would assist us with putting our roads back in shape, because again, we had, after some of the flooding started to recede, we know that we had 110 roads that were closed, that had some kind of damage on them. These are paved roads, gravel roads, bridges out, you name it, we had it all over the county. So Anadarko, Bill Barrett, Noble, and Canna, I'm sure I'm gonna miss somebody, but I'm gonna name those guys because they stepped up and came in and started putting roads together for us. So I think this is Weld County Road 28. You can see there the line out in the middle of the road, the damage, it was basically totally gone. They repaired it to the gravel road that you see below. Noble came in and prepared this road. This is somewhere in central Weld County. Again, another road that's just totally gone. They came back in and repaired it so that we had them ready to go. So as of now, by the end of November, we believe we'll have 100% of our roads all open again. But as of right now, we have about 96% of those roads all open. And that's because of the assistance that we received from the oil and gas companies and from other counties throughout Colorado who came in and helped us put our roads back in shape. And we did that with our contingency fund balance that we had because we've been so fiscally conservative. We were able to pay for those and get them done. So that's the kind of impact that we feel that we have from a local government perspective with regard to the energy industry in Weld County. And I think this goes back. I wanted to talk real quickly about this slide because there was a lot of information out there, a lot of scare going on out there, if you will, that there was a whole bunch of oil and gas in the water because, you know, these guys, and I keep pointing to Ted because he's sitting behind me here, but because the energy industry, you know, was just irresponsible and they were out there and they didn't do what they needed to do. The reality is that the energy industry on Wednesday before the flooding started shutting in all their wells that were in the flood areas and in the floodplain areas. The reality is we had anywhere from 40,000 to 55,000 gallons of oil and gas. And as I told the guy on KOA, Stephen Tubbs, the reality is we can mitigate that and we can clean that up. Our greatest health concern is all of the industrial, commercial, and raw sewage waste that has been coming into our county for the last 5 days. The state health department went out and tested all of those river basins and all those flooded areas, and as I think you all probably saw in the Denver Post and on the news, it was reported there is no oil and gas contamination in the water. So we're pretty happy about that as well. We think all those rules we've been working on with the oil and gas industry for the last 20, 25 years, they worked. So with that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Ted. Really get you to yours, I think.
Well, thanks, thanks, Barb. Hard act to follow, obviously. A lot of things going on. I'll try to get through this presentation. I've got a little bit of a throat frog here today, but what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of perspective of Noble Energy and some of the things that's going on within our company, and also talk a little bit about how we build public trust and what the industry really needs to focus on. For those of you that don't know Noble Energy, we are a global company. We have operations all over the world. 5 core areas shown here on the map, and one of those obviously is the DJ Basin, and we have about 1,000 plus people that are directly employed by Noble that live here in Colorado. We have a large office here in Denver as well as an operations center up in Greeley, and quite a bit of growth going on throughout the company. We'll probably spend on the order of about $4 billion this year as a company, but about $2 billion of that will be right here in Weld County. So a very significant part of our operations that we're very proud of. I wanted to hit on a couple of points, and some of the previous speakers have already done this, but talk a little bit about where we are at as an industry today and this energy renaissance that we're experiencing, and the fact that it's been technology and innovation that has really driven us in this place that we find ourselves, where energy security is finally within reach. When it was just a few years ago, we were talking about how we're going to have to build all these LNG terminals to import natural gas. And here we are turning those around and talking about exporting natural gas. But one of the things that we need to really start focusing on as an industry is building public trust. We know that we're doing it right as an industry, but the public doesn't. And we've got to start doing some things a little bit out of our comfort zone in order to try to convince folks that, and maybe it's not just us that tells the story, but we have to do more to make sure that they understand that we're conducting our operations the most safe and responsible way possible, and working with the state regulators in developing these best practices. It all adds up to the fact that we need to be regulated as an industry and not banned as an industry. A ban is a poor way in order to regulate us. And so we need to step up as an industry and demonstrate that we can fill this space in a much different way. And really get people to understand that they're being presented with a false choice when it comes to energy development and the environment. We can have clean air, we can have clean water, and we can have this responsible development. And it's up to us as an industry and as stakeholders across this state to deliver that message. And then, of course, we've all talked about already significant investment and job opportunities, just a lot of things going on right here in Colorado. Barb mentioned, the DJ Basin and specifically in Wattenberg Field, how it's, contains about 20,000 wells, and how this field has developed over time. And of course, we hydraulically fractured our first well back in 1970. But when you look at how this field has reinvented itself over the years, it's just flat amazing. And what we're really seeing now, since about, we drilled the first horizontal wells in 2009, but we didn't really start getting into the development side until mid to late 2010 and into 2011. Now you can see where horizontal development is going to be rapidly overtaking vertical production within this basin. Noble has a pretty aggressive plan for capital expenditures out here. We'll probably spend on the order of $10 to $15 billion over the next 5 years. Pretty aggressive growth plan for us. So just a great story about how this basin continues to reinvent itself. And with that comes the things that we've already talked about, the jobs, the revenue streams. When you look at that $1.5 billion, that Richard mentioned earlier, annual state, local taxes and royalty, $500 million of that goes directly to education. And so a ban on hydraulic fracturing and a ban on this industry is really making education take a back seat. And so that's one of the messages that we need to help people understand, is that oil and gas development in this state really helps fund a lot of the education here in Colorado. And of course, we've already talked about the wages on the order of about $7 billion. So just a tremendous story with this horizontal play that we're witnessing. So how do we build this public trust? And one of the things that we've been focused on quite a bit is trying to reduce our footprint. And one of the things that I like to focus on quite a bit is how we store water, how we move water, how we move oil, and get these trucks off the road. And one of the things that we're doing is putting in a lot more infrastructure, and we'll probably take about 250,000 truck trips off of the road this year in Weld County as a result of that. Obviously, great for emissions and dust and just the overall traffic situation within the county. But water conservation is one of the things that we're very much focused on. By year end 2013, 85% of our water will either be recycled or will come from non-hydrologic sources. That is water that's not competing with municipal supplies or agriculture. It's probably about 1,000 feet deep. A lot of it's not even potable. And using that water in order to develop these resources. So trying to get the message out there that it is all about reducing footprint, and how can we continue to innovate on that side of it. One of the things that we're pretty proud of is partnering with CSU for really the first of its kind in the world of this real-time groundwater monitoring project. We're going to drill about 15 of these monitor wells around the field, and basically what it is it's going to have a device within the well that it will allow for groundwater quality in a real-time world, posted out on a public site so that everybody can see it. Now again, we as an industry know that we're not polluting groundwater, and we've said that over and over, but the public does not trust us. What do we have to do in order to advance that trust? And this is one of the ways we think that if this project proves successful, which we really believe it will, then this is something, again, that we as an industry really have to look at very hard, and we're excited to be a partner with CSU on that. So Commissioner Kirkmeyer mentioned quite a bit about the whole CNG, LNG opportunity in Weld County, and how Noble is committed to converting our fleets and reducing emissions. And we delivered a $5 million check to Weld County to convert their school buses to LNG. And I'm very proud to say that we're building the very first LNG plant right here in Colorado that, when that's up and running, that's going to be the equivalent of taking about 100,000 cars per year off the road on NOx emissions. So it is all about how do you reduce that footprint, and you do it in a way that you partner with the community, and it's a win-win situation for everyone. I did want to mention before I left here today that Noble and Anadarko have partnered to launch a project that we call Coloradoans for Responsible Energy Development, or CRED. Many of you might have heard some of the ads. We've done some pregame shows and such on KOA. But this is an organization that is all about education. And it's a broad-based coalition that will be made up of folks all across Colorado. It's not the industry telling the story, but it's other people, other stakeholders within this great state. In the ag community, and the teachers, and the firefighters, and the public servants, and the business community to talk about what this industry really means to the state of Colorado. And so CRED is just now getting launched and up and operating, And it is, again, an education effort because folks really don't understand the importance of the industry to the state or what we do. We recently had an event also with our CEO, Chuck Davidson, where he talked a little bit about Noble Energy at the Young Professional event here in Denver. So there's just a great opportunity here in Colorado. And again, I think we've got to change the conversation about this false choice. And it's up to each and every one of us to do that. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So thank you very much.
Well, I think this has been an extraordinary panel, and I'd like to ask them a couple of questions, really picking up on Ted's point about reducing one's footprint. I think you also said building public trust. First, I'm going to give Ted a tremendous compliment. He recently hired what I think is one of the best environmental professionals in the country, Kate Fay, who was both at the health department and at EPA developing some of the most thoughtful regulations. So Ted, I mean, clearly you're putting your money where your mouth is by hiring just remarkable talent, and you've always had that. But let me point out a couple articles that were just in this weekend's paper. One was a Wall Street Journal article, Energy Boom Puts Wells in America's Backyard, talking about this almost inherent conflict between industrials and industrial process, which most communities, unlike Weld County, just aren't used to. And in there is an interesting quote, and I'll ask both Ted and Barbara to talk about it, is a quote from A.J. Krieger, a town administrator of Erie, Colorado, in which he mentions that 2 companies have signed voluntary agreements with energy companies to mandate the use of vapor recovery units, something that's not typically practiced. And I think this is one of the big challenges I'd like to focus on for a minute. I'll go to the other article, but maybe start with Barbara and then Ted, which is there is a perception that, groundwater to me it's a technical issue, it's a misinformation. But we do have a real conflict that this industry has to contend with, which is either methane emissions or volatile organic compound emissions. And Barbara and Ted, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the leadership that you all are undertaking to deal with these issues. I know, Barbara, you mentioned a little bit that you're actually seeing VOCs being reduced.
Sure. Is this on?
Can people hear Barbara?
If you can hear me in the back, do you want to wave? Okay, great. So actually, we work with the energy industry quite a bit on a lot of the areas, like I spoke about, where there are impacts, and we work to mitigate those. A couple of those have been, we worked with them starting in 2007. I wasn't a county commissioner then, but the previous board worked with the energy industry to ensure that we were going out and addressing the air quality impacts from the industry in Weld County. And we work together, and that means that we also go down and talk about the regulations together. We worked with the state health department on that. And the energy industry came back and said that they were going to, like I said, I call them catalytic converters. I don't know what the exact name is, but worked to put those on each of their drill sites. A couple of other things, other areas where we work with the industry is, as already mentioned by AJ, who is the town administrator from Erie, we also work with our municipalities who work with the industry to develop intergovernmental agreements or agreements that says this is how we will operate within your town boundaries. And in the county, we try to honor those as much as we possibly can. We've also identified our local government designee. That actually was a process that was developed way back in the 90s. It was a suggestion that Weld County had, but it's a process where the local government gets involved and can go in and influence the permitting process to some extent and work with them on that. And then just recently, we have in Weld County committed to a working group to look at the possibility of requiring site plan reviews for oil and gas industry for those folks who aren't following a good, solid business plan, who aren't following best management practices. So we've had Encana and Anadarko and Noble, and I keep mentioning those 3 because between those 3, they represent over 50% of the development within Weld County. We've had them in work sessions where we have talked about what are the best practices, what does a business plan look like for the oil and gas company to, as Ted said in his presentation, reduce that footprint and mitigate those impacts, and then how do we start getting that out to the public? So those are some examples.
Thank you. Ted?
One of the things that we like to talk a little bit about is, on the best practice side is equipping a lot of our folks with infrared guns and trying to police ourselves on air emissions. And air emissions continues to be very much a focal point for not only the industry, but opposition groups as well, because they're not all convinced that we are as clean as coal. And I think we have to prove that. And one of the things I think that we can look forward to over the next few months is we have new rulemaking in process on air quality. And I think there's going to be some opportunities there for the industry to demonstrate how they can leverage technology. And that's really what it's about. It's trying to leverage the latest technology and put those in place and obviously make those a requirement. But in the end, we have to drive to zero methane. I can't emphasize that enough. If we're going to build this public trust, and they're going to be watching us, believe me, at every turn. If we're going to build that, we're going to have that as a goal out there. We're going to have to look at where we can place ourselves in that world in order to not only continue to develop this resource and see the renaissance that we're talking about, but it is that social license to operate. When we're in somebody's backyard, we have to realize that, you know what, this is a privilege even being here, first of all. And second of all, we've got to do it right and we've got to do it better. So
I think that's just an exemplary approach. One of the articles, the other article I mentioned in this week's New York Times, is that the oil companies are being sued for the waste of natural gas, which is a fascinating different take of saying, well, you're flaring gas, therefore it's a waste, even though they knew it's a waste. So it's an interesting challenge that this industry is going to face. Let me turn the conversation a little bit, because as an economic regulator, I look really good these days because the Colorado Public Utilities Commission has kept rates very low. And I'd like to say it's because of my wisdom, but in all truth, I don't have that, but also we have low natural gas prices. And so really for Richard and John and for all four panelists, how do we keep these prices low? How do we make sure there's sufficient natural gas supplies? I mean, one way to do it is to raise natural gas prices, which would induce more activity, but then that contradicts really the benefit that we're getting as a society. Prices are lower. So whether Richard or John or any panelists have a thought on how do we make sure this is a sustainable, I think, John, you said it best. You said there was a question, is this for real? And it certainly is. How do we make sure it stays real besides the outstanding relationships that local governments and companies are having to reduce the footprint?
Yeah, well, the economist in me says you let the market solve the problem and it'll be sustainable. But I know that's a little tongue-in-cheek, and I think everyone can say, well, you know, you look at what's happened. You look at where the prices are today. Yes, they're artificially low relative to what they need to be in a long-term sustainable setting. I do think what you will see is prices will rebound. I don't think that's going to put tremendous upward pressure on the individual consumers. I think one of the big fears out there is LNG exports. There's been a lot of discussion about this, and if you understand the economics, you understand that you don't have to be fearful of this. You look at the global LNG market, it's about 33 BCF a day. You look at the number of applications that are pending with DOE, it's about 28 BCF a day, 29, and you understand from the economics, all this supply cannot flow into that global market, you know, and so I think our bigger risks are not about where price will stabilize, but it's about shocks to the system as the market works to adjust. And so it's a question of, have we been smart about building our midstream so that we can connect the resource base to the end consumers, to the markets, in a way that's sequencing out so that you don't have unanticipated demand spikes that lead to cost spikes. And that's the real challenge I think that we've got as a country, is managing that process. And industry, consumers, politicians jointly can do that, I think.
So I would echo that and say liquefied natural gas in the U.S. You know, you were talking about that, and I think that's absolutely a great opportunity for the country, and it's something that is going to be pursued more over time if we keep if we keep in this production. The return of manufacturing to the U.S. has certainly, part of it has been driven by great energy prices and especially natural gas prices. And of course, we're converting a lot of plants, you know more than almost any of us about this, but converting a lot of electrical energy generation to this. So at the end of the day, I guess I don't have the concern. I am a markets guy, so I think the market will work. But I do think that prices at this level, you're going to see more and more conversion of other energy uses.
At this point, we have about 5 minutes left of our panel. We are more happy to take questions from the audience. We have two very talented young men who are both eligible for employment right now, Tim Harmon and Adam Berg, recent college graduates who are superstars who've got microphones. So I can't see out, but Adam, we've got a question up here.
This is primarily for Ted. A market, downstream market, that was not mentioned here is one that I've been chasing quite a bit. Gas to liquid. Shell is building a plant working to build a plant in Louisiana, $12 billion plant to convert gas to liquid. Is there a place for this in Colorado as a market opportunity? Noble, you have not done, apparently you aren't involved in the downstream stuff in that arena. Is there any chance you might consider getting into it?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of opportunity there. You know, when you look at the abundance of natural gas in this state, you know, primarily on the western slope, but also the associated gas that we have in Wattenberg, we're just now peeling this onion back. You know, when you look at the fact that we really didn't start getting into this LNG world and thinking about it. Understand. But I mean, you know, the LNG side of it was the first step. And I think that next step is something that obviously I'm not sure that Noble wants to get into that space. That's not our primary business. But with the amount of resources that we have in this state, there are so many opportunities for things like that. I don't know why we wouldn't, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm very optimistic on that side. Why wouldn't we do that? So.
Any other questions? Well, let's please thank our panelists who did an outstanding job.